Welcome to the Capital News. I am your host, Alex Kreitis. Today is January 6th, 2020. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope you all enjoyed your weekend. Well, of course, there was some news stories that took place over the weekend. I said, you know what, we're just going to take a break. We're just going to continue to take a deep breath. These stories are very fluid. World War III may be in the first throes. We got time. We're going to talk about these things here today. There's a lot I want to talk about. The title of today's podcast is The End Game, the Economy and Iran. So I want to talk about market performance. We're going to get to that. I want to talk about the minutes of the Federal Reserve's meeting. We're going to talk about that. I want to talk about somebody who I will frequently watch on YouTube. He's not too much in any of the mainstream media. Gerald Celente is pretty much a trend forecaster. Has been doing it for about 40 years. Some of you may have come across this gentleman online, on YouTube, or on some independent media platforms, but you're typically going to find him on YouTube. I know he used to be on some of the mainstream media channels years ago, but I have not seen him on there for quite a while. He has a pretty good track record when it comes to major geopolitical and economic events, so I do want to highlight some of what he was talking about in his latest podcast that he gave last week. Clearly, I stated at the top of the podcast the attacks in Kenya. So is this a tit for tat? Was this a proxy by Iran to retaliate to America because of our killing, our assassination of General Soleimani? Very well could be. We have yet to strike back, at least not physically yet. And of course, Donald Trump, via Twitter, is pretty much proclaiming his strategy that there are 52 sites in Iran that have been designated as attack zones in the event that Iran attacks the United States in some form or another. Now, of course, some of these attack zones, if you will, are cultural. This is human history, basically. And when you have the quote-unquote rules of war, both here in the United States and international law, these areas, these cultural sites, are not supposed to be targeted. This is something that the terrorists do. This is something that ISIS is known for doing. Why this would even enter the mind of the President of the United States is beyond me. And if it does, okay, that's one thing. It's in your mind. Guess what, Donald? Keep it to yourself, please. Keep it to yourself. Do not put this out there on Twitter that the United States is going to engage in the type of behavior that one would expect from terrorists, that one would expect from ISIS, because we've already seen this. This is human history. This does not need to be destroyed. There does not need to be a World War III. We're about peace and prosperity here. We hope this does not happen. But when you assassinate a sovereign country's top general, there are going to be some sort of repercussions. Now we all sit and wait. I thought we were safer. But of course, everybody's being removed from Iraq. Everybody's on high alert. Not jiving. The Iraqis have voted they want the United States out. They want U.S. troops out of their country. Well, surprise, surprise. Surprise, surprise. I bet we wouldn't want Iraqi troops in the United States either. I bet we wouldn't want Iranian troops in the United States. I bet we wouldn't want Russian troops or Chinese troops in the United States either. Or Mexican or Canadian, for that matter, with bases set up, with huge embassies set up, and with their governments dictating to our government and to our people what to do, when to do it, how to do it. I bet we wouldn't take too kindly to that type of action. But that's exactly what the United States has been doing for decades, especially in the Middle East. And the people of Iraq are sick and tired of it. And rightly so, because we would be sick and tired of it. In fact, we wouldn't even tolerate it for a second here in this country. Not for a second, but these people in other countries are supposed to tolerate it for an indefinite period of time. It is the antithesis of the founding of this country. It is the antithesis of the freedom philosophy, of self-government, power to the individual. This is an empire. That is not what the United States of America is supposed to be. And then, of course, Donald Trump was threatening over the weekend, again, via Twitter. This is how he communicates, via Twitter, that if the Iraqis vote to vote us out, to kick the United States troops out of their country, there's going to be hell to pay. There's going to be huge economic sanctions. And if they want us out, guess what? They're going to have to load up and pay us billions and billions of dollars because of all of the money that we've put into that country. Now, that might be fair. You can say, okay, whatever. We shouldn't have been there to begin with. We went over this last week. Now, this is probably going to be a common theme on this podcast for the time being. Why? Because I imagine that things are just going to get heated up. They're just getting started. So we have to remember our history because everybody forgets our history. And I'm not even talking about 100 years ago, 200 years ago. I'm talking about the past decade. The past 10 years, the past 20 years. Have we learned nothing? We said last week, hindsight's supposed to be 2020. Of course, a play on words because we're in the year 2020. We said, what have we learned? Clearly nothing. Clearly not a damn thing. We could not win, and we have not won in Afghanistan. And in fact, the Taliban is even more powerful now than what they were 20 years ago. The Iraqis, who were supposed to be greeting us as liberators, now want us out of there. Surprise, surprise. They are one of the countries on our global protest list because they're sick and tired of what their own government's doing, and they're sick and tired of what the American government has been doing to their country. When is this going to end? Again, the end game. That's what we want to talk about here today. What's the strategy? We want to kill a bad man in Iraq who's an Iranian, General Soleimani. Okay, he's a bad dude. Responsible for killing Americans maybe directly, indirectly by being a mastermind, whatever the case may be. Okay, he's gone. Okay. What about his right-hand man who's now in charge? We got to go after him too because I'm sure he's no angel. I'm sure he's no saint. And whose perspective are you looking at this from? Because one man's patriot is another man's terrorist. One man's junk is another man's treasure. One man's debt is another man's asset. You understand? Two sides to every coin. Different sides, different perspectives. In regards to the Iraqi situation with wanting us out, there was a letter that was released by the Defense Department that should not have been released, and now the White House and the Defense Department are walking this back because they were basically putting out this letter saying, yes, the United States is going to remove its troops, its forces from Iraq, and no, we are not doing that. That was a mistake. It was poorly worded, never should have been released, yada, yada, yada. Again, this goes back to our podcast a few weeks ago, whenever it was, who to believe, what to believe. We still have the impeachment soap opera that's taking place, and you continue to have people stating that what the president is doing is a distraction from the impeachment trial, which is supposed to take place in the Senate. Of course, we are still waiting on Speaker Nancy Pelosi to send the articles of impeachment to the Senate. She better get a move on it. Let's go. Let's get this thing moving. And of course, Donald Trump is taking to Twitter like a madman, saying, oh, look, I have so much on my plate now. I'm so busy. This whole thing, let's just call this whole impeachment thing off, which only gives more evidence that this is a distraction. Because a lot of the problems that he is talking about, a lot of the busy things, why he's so busy, his plate's so full, is his own doing. It's his own doing. Maybe you don't like the Iran deal that we had under Barack Obama. That's fair enough. No deal's perfect. But Donald Trump at the time, remember, said that Barack Obama was going to attack Iran to get reelected in 2012. He's going to do that, he said, because he cannot negotiate. He cannot make a deal. Well, he did make a deal. He made a deal in conjunction with our European allies. From what we understand, Iran was at least somewhat sticking to that deal. Could there have been some finer points in that deal that you wanted to shore up a little bit? Sure, go that method. Don't just say we're out and then embark on this plan of maximum pressure, of massive economic sanctions that is crippling that country. I think the latest inflation figure out of Iran was near 28%. 28% inflation. That is devastating. That is devastating. And it's not just attacking or targeting the Iran leadership. It is attacking and it is targeting the entire country. So, I mean, that in and of itself can be construed as an act of war. Because again, we would not tolerate that here in the United States for a second. So we have massive economic sanctions that have been placed on Iran, and we just killed their top general. I mean, a 1-2 punch. Many might consider those things, or at least together, an act of war, a declaration of war. And don't forget, Donald Trump, again via Twitter, is now stating, look, Congress, Anything I say on Twitter, that's it. That's policy. Consider anything I say on Twitter is your notification. I'm not calling any of you up. I'm not having you over at the White House. I'm not making a trip to Capitol Hill. Nope. Just check my Twitter feed. You've been put on notice. That's it. Fort Pitt. This is ridiculous. I mean, this is the President of the United States. Does anybody see anything wrong with this, or are you perfectly fine with this? This is getting out of control. U.S.-China trade deal. We now hear that the Premier of Agriculture, or the Minister of Agriculture in China, is stating that they will not be increasing quotas for grain, for American grain. Well, then how is the deal going to be held up? How are they going to be buying so much beautiful American agriculture where our farmers have to buy more land, they got to knock down more forests, they got to plant more crops, they got to buy more John Deere tractors? How are we going to sell it if the Chinese are not going to increase their import quotas for grain? Well, it doesn't look like it's going to be happening. And now you add on to this assassination in the Middle East, not looking so good, because China is a large purchaser, a very large purchaser of Iranian oil, as is Japan. But of course, a lot of this is under sanction too. So now it's really going to start to get interesting. And don't forget, I think it's about 20% of the world's oil and gas travels through the Strait of Hormuz, which is pretty much under control of the Iranians. Or it can be. It could be shut down, or at least temporarily. Of course, we have our forces over there en masse. But you're not supposed to know that. It's only supposed to be a few thousand here and there, a couple thousand there. And that's it. I think it's much, much more than that. We got a lot of hardware over there. We got a lot of software over there. We got a lot of people over there. And we're spending on our defense budget like we've never spent before. And I told you for a long time on this podcast, since we were online last February, when all else fails, they take us to war. And you don't build up that type of defense budget not to use it. And that has been in the back of my mind, creeping ever so slowly, but steadily to the front of my mind. And now here we are, on the brink of World War III. And I don't say this to be hyperbolic or to be, off the top or exaggerate. That's not my style here. You know this. This is highly reminiscent of how World War I got started with an assassination of Archduke Ferdinand. That assassination, that was that shot heard round the world that started World War I, which was supposed to be the war to end all wars, which, of course, not close at all. And here we are about to start perhaps another one. Because you have the Chinese who are dependent on this oil. You have the Russians who are allies of Iran. You have Saudi Arabia, who is an enemy of Iran. You have the Iranians supporting the Syrians. You have Russia in Syria. You have the Turks in Syria. You now have the Turks going into Libya, which is causing a stir again by the Israelis and the Greeks and the Cypriots. See what's going on here? All the world's a stage. All of these chess pieces are being put in place for something. What might that something be? Could it be World War III? Is that the end game here? Is that what they're trying to do? Is this for a massive global distraction because the globe is protesting? Because the global economy is continuing to slip and to deteriorate across the board? When all else fails, take us to war? Has the assassination of General Soleimani, has that solidified, has that unified the Iranian people? Ponder these questions. Now, the U.S.-China trade deal is supposed to be signed next week on the 15th. Vice Premier Li He, who has been the chief delegate or the chief negotiator on the Chinese side, along with some others in that trade delegation, are supposed to come to Washington, D.C. for a signing ceremony. Not President Xi, unless there's going to be some big surprise that he shows up next week. But I'm not holding my breath on that. I'm not even holding my breath that Vice Premier Li He shows up next week. I have no idea what they're going to do. We have no idea what's in this deal. This is phase one. We were told months ago that Donald Trump, by the president, he was not going to sign anything or agree to any deal that was not huge. That was not pretty much the whole enchilada, the whole thing, not bits and pieces. This is phase one, whatever that means, because we don't know what's in it. Supposedly the Chinese are supposed to buy more agricultural products, but now we have the Minister of Agriculture coming out and say, well, we're not increasing our imports, our import quota. So what are they going to buy? Who are they going to buy it from? Where's it going to come from? Where's it going to go? There's no credibility, which takes us right back to last spring when I wrote my letter, which is still on my website, thecapitalnews.com. I hope you check it out. I took the time through a podcast to read it to everybody. In a few short months, it's going to be a year since that letter was written and sent to the White House. And it all had to do with credibility. If the president loses all credibility, then it's it. This was in the context of the trade war because we were being jerked around. And I said, you cannot keep doing this. You can't keep manipulating the stock market, which he continues to do. You cannot continue to jerk the people around and say there's going to be a great deal and then there's nothing. That there's going to be a signing ceremony and then there isn't. Because there was supposed to be a signing ceremony back in November and there wasn't. Now there's supposed to be one next week. Will that take place? And what's in the deal? We have no idea. But if it's just agricultural products, well, whoop-de-doo. It's going to take us right back to where we were 2 years ago. What a surprise. 1.4 billion people need to eat. And the United States is a powerhouse when it comes to agriculture. Wow. Huge deal maker you are, Donnie boy. Congratulate yourself on going back to where we were 2 years ago and still have tariffs on top of it. Still have the manufacturing sector in decline, some areas in contraction. Farmers going bankrupt, out of business, not coming back. Good job. Meanwhile, we continue, the taxpayers, John Q. Public, continues to bail out other farmers. And the vast majority of those farmers are not your mom and pop, your family farms. They're the corporate farms. So much for draining the swamp. Then we have Boeing. More bad news out of Boeing in regards to the 737 MAX airliner. More information coming out from the investigation that's taking place by the FAA, and obviously in conjunction with Boeing themselves, that there might be an electrical problem in the tail of the 737 MAX because a couple wires might be too close together, which could cause a short circuit. Well, isn't this fantastic? The hits just keep on coming for Boeing. And then it was reported in the financial news that Boeing has just taken out a huge bond, huge loan, a lot more debt. A lot more debt they're taking on. Now, there's some speculation that the reason why Boeing is doing this is because this is going to lead to more financial engineering. They're going to go out there, they're going to buy more of their own stock to give their stock an artificial boost. Well, why not? That's what everybody else is doing. There's no organic growth. Let's just financial engineer the hell out of everything. Could be that. It could be because they are foreseeing a whole bunch of lawsuits and they're trying to get ahead of it, at least get some cash. Whether it's borrowed money or not, at least they have it to pay out some of those claims. Maybe it's because they halted the production of the 737 MAX, so they just want to shore up some more cash. Or because they know something else in regards to the Middle East tension, because they are front and center when it comes to the military-industrial complex. And is this a means of bailing out Boeing? Because there are going to be further problems down the line. Well, they might not be able to do the commercial airliners, but guess what? They can do the war machines. We'll bail them out that way. Could be a combination of all of them. But it's not good news coming out of Boeing. Now, across the pond, way across the pond in Japan, we have their PMI services, not manufacturing, but services PMI, contracting the most in over 3 years. The most in over 3 years. Japan services PMI was at 49.4. Remember, 50 is our flat line. Above 50 is expansion. Below 50 is contraction. Japan services PMI was at 49.4 in December. Wasn't there a Santa Claus rally? Wasn't everybody shopping? Isn't everybody happy? What's going on? compared to the preliminary figure of 50.6 and after a final 50.3 in the previous month. So this is further deterioration in one of the world's largest economies. No surprise here to us at the Capital News. How is Japan taking the news? At the time of this podcast, the Nikkei is up 1.46%, up 339 points. So clearly, they don't care. They don't care that there is contraction in their services sector. We've known this about their manufacturing sector. We said, look, it's going to be manufacturing that leads. Services will follow. Here it is. The Nikkei, the Japanese stock market, is up 1.46% at the time of this podcast. Now, a lot of this is on the supposed headline out that is out there, not supposed, it is out there, that some of the Mideast tensions are calming down. I have no idea what that means. I guess time will tell. We have the Dow Jones Industrial Average. Even though it started off in the red, can't keep a good dog down, folks. No, not when the Federal Reserve is in existence. Not when they throw $77 billion, you heard me correctly, $77 billion worth of liquidity into the repo markets today. $77 billion. That buys a lot of stuff. And that takes the stock market from red to green. It might take all day to do it, but they did it. Dow Jones Industrial Average gained 0.1%. The S&P 500 was up about 0.25%. The NASDAQ 100 gained 0.5%. And the small caps did pretty much the same thing, going from red to green by the end of the day. A little bit of a pullback in WTI crude oil, now sitting at $62.36 a barrel. Brent, the international metric, is at $68 and change. Natural gas at $2.15. Gold pulled back a little bit today, or at least at the time of this podcast. It was a little choppy today, did go up, but right now at the time of this podcast, pulling back slightly, as is silver. Gold is at $1,560 an ounce. Silver is at $18.05 an ounce. Those are your commodities that we're concerned about here. And again, when you have this type of uncertainty that's taking place in the Middle East, you're going to have a flight to safe haven assets that can be construed as gold and silver, the precious metals. I still believe that we are in the midst of a bull market, and I stated this last week. When I say bull market, I don't mean as a day trade. I don't mean as a swing trade. I mean for the long term, a year or longer. Gold and silver are in a bull market as far as I am concerned. We have U.S. 10-year Treasury at 1.79%. Again, another flight to safety. How much longer will all of this continue? It's day to day. It is day-to-day. It's headline-driven. It's tweet-driven. It's Federal Reserve, central bank liquidity-driven. It's the combination of all of them. But the Federal Reserve, their minutes came out and said, oh, well, we're probably going to keep rates lower for longer. Don't hold your breath, folks. Don't hold your breath. At the end of 2018, we were told that they were going to increase rates going through 2019. They did no such thing. The quantitative tightening was just going to be on autopilot. They did no such thing. We're now back to quantitative easing. We've had 3 rate cuts. So now they say, well, we're going to be lower for longer. We're just going to be on a pause. We're just going to be on a pause here for a while. And then you've had the 2 idiots come out over the past couple of days. Former chairman of the Federal Reserve, Ben Bernanke, and Janet Yellen, both coming out and saying, well, yeah, we could go lower. Ben Bernanke, yeah, we could go into negative interest rates. This guy should be locked up. Janet Yellen should be locked up. They should all be locked up for economic crimes against humanity, for theft, for counterfeit. But of course, the U.S. government sanctions it, so they can get away with it. They can steal your prosperity, they can steal your inheritance, and get away with it. They can steal your wealth and transfer it to the top 1% of the 1% and get away with it, and nobody says a thing. Just pay attention to your Super Bowl, to your football score. That's all. Pay attention to the abortion. Pay attention how many bathrooms there has to be. That's all. Don't pay attention to the real things that really matter. No, that affects everybody. Pay attention to all these sideline issues. Pay attention to the gossip. Pay attention to what's going on in Hollywood. Pay attention to what's going on the football field. Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. So that's the Federal Reserve in a nutshell. It's no surprise. They are continuing with their repo madness, clearly, because there is no price discovery. The markets were attempting to have price discovery today, but God forbid that takes place, that we have free market capitalism in a country that talks about free market capitalism. Can't happen. Can't go down. You can't have a down day. I guess the Europeans didn't get the message because they were down across the board. The UK was down 0.5%. The Germans were down 0.6. The French were down 0.4. And we have the Italians down 0.5%, and the Spanish were down 1/3. They must not have gotten the memo. Where's the ECB? Why aren't they priming the press? Well, they are. They are. Just not in overdrive yet, I guess. Not like the Federal Reserve. How much longer is this going to continue? It was supposed to be temporary. Started back in September. Remember they said, pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. This is just a one-off. This is just the end of the third quarter. This is just the Treasury rolling over some debt. No big thing. Pay no attention. We called BS that day. We gave them credit. We said we'll give them the benefit of the doubt, but we're still in the back of our minds, we're saying BS. But we'll say, okay, it's a one-off. Chairman, Jay Powell, okay, we'll give you credit. Benefit of the doubt, we'll see. Of course, it didn't take that long. It only took a couple weeks to realize that this was not temporary and that it was going to get bigger in scope and in size, and that's exactly what has continued to happen. And that is why we have witnessed a melt-up over the past 4 months and continuing into 2020. Despite the geopolitical tensions, despite a phase one trade deal with China, which nobody knows what's in it, it's going to keep going higher. You cannot keep it down because there is no price discovery. That becomes one of the scariest things, actually, because if the market does have its way with the market, which it will, the market will, free market capitalism always wins at the end of the day. And when it has its way, with the stock market, with the bond market, wherever it's going to show its head, it's going to bring everything down with it, and it's going to be that much more drastic. It's going to be that much more devastating. Because it's not going to blow a whistle. It's not going to sound an alarm. It's not going to send rocket flares and red lights all over the place warning you, telling you that tomorrow is the day or today is the day. It's just going to happen. And it's going to happen quickly. Corrections can wipe out weeks or months of gains with a flash of an eye. In a week, you can eliminate months of gains. That's how quickly this can all evaporate. How many of us are ready for that? That's why I tell you to stay diversified. Because nobody knows what's going to happen. Nobody knows when the market forces, true market forces, are going to have its way with this economy. We see it in the numbers, in the fundamental economy, but we're not seeing it in the stock market. We're seeing some signs of it in the bond market because there is a decoupling between the stock market and the bond market once again. It's no surprise to us here. Typically, the bond market is correct, but so long as you have the Federal Reserve in overdrive, anything's possible. But getting back to the trend forecaster, Gerald Celente, and I advise this audience to check him out as well. I'm sure some of you do. Gerald Celente, I don't know how old he is. I would guess maybe somewhere in his 60s, something like that, because he's been doing this forecasting for 40 years. So I'm just assuming 60s, maybe close to 70. I don't know. Typically, he's a very passionate and fiery personality, very humorous as far as I'm concerned. I've been watching him and listening to him for, probably a few years, I would say at least. He was not that typical self on his Friday podcast or his Friday show last Friday when all of this stuff about Iran and all this came out. He was very solemn. He was very serious. And basically saying that he believes that assassination of General Soleimani is the first shot of World War III. And then he went through and he gave his reasons why, this, that, and the other, and how that they were forecasting. He was showing an article that they posted back in 2017 that there's going to be war with Iran, a stock market crash, yada, 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 and the start of World War III. Again, this guy has pretty much an impeccable forecasting record. So I take from his tone of voice, his body language, and the whole thing that he's pretty serious about this because it's his reputation on the line. He's not going to come out and make such a statement if he doesn't believe that it's true. That's how I find this person to be. I find him very credible. I find him very principled. So that's some serious stuff. Somebody who's been doing this for 40 years, somebody who understands the game, somebody who understands that Democrats and Republicans are one and the same, that it's a divide and conquer strategy, that if you're a Republican, maybe you give a little more money to this side. If you're a Democrat, maybe a little bit more money goes to that side. But at the end of the day, they're all criminals, they're all crooks, and there's $24 trillion in debt with no end in sight. That there's endless wars, and another one, World War III, might just be beginning. So these are the type of people that I seek information from. A lot of books that I read on the history of a lot of this stuff. I was going to take the time, didn't get to it today. I'm going to be wrapping this up here shortly, but I was going to read some paragraphs from my book, The Cynic's Guide to Investing, when it came to our chapter on defense spending. Might have to do that tomorrow or some other time. I think I did that several months ago, probably in the midst of some other type of tension. But we're going to do this over and over here on the Capital News podcast because people have to have an appreciation for history and what's really going on here. And the reason why so much of what is taking place is forecastable to some degree because it's the same playbook, it's the same script. There are no weapons of mass destruction in Iran. That did not stop the CIA, George Bush, Dick Cheney, and everybody else from coming out and saying there are weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, and we have to go in there and we have to get rid of Saddam Hussein. It's a slam dunk, sir. Now we have Donald J. Trump coming out and saying there was intelligence, the attack was imminent, we had to take this guy out, we had to do it. All the while, for the past 3 or 4 years, 4 years easily, because when Donald Trump even was a candidate, he was saying, look, we got into the Middle East off of faulty intelligence. For years, even as president, he has been second-guessing his intelligence community. Now, all of a sudden, we have the best intelligence community ever in the history of the world. A few short months ago, I'm not going to listen to them. I'm going to listen to Vladimir Putin, who said we did not meddle in U.S. elections. I'm not going to listen to the CIA. I'm not going to listen to the DIA. I'm not going to listen to FBI, NSA. I'm not going to listen to our intelligence. I'm going to listen to Vladimir Putin. Now, all of a sudden, it turns on a dime. Now we have the best intelligence. And it has to do with something that may have kickstarted World War III or at least some other massive, major escalation in the Middle East. And what's the end game? I still don't know. Does anybody know the president's strategy here? Does anybody know what the end game is? Because he told us it's not regime change. Of course, that's the same playbook out of the George W. Bush White House. We're not here for regime change. Oh, no. We're not here for nation building. Oh, no. Past 20 years tells me otherwise. Same playbook, same rhetoric. What's going on here? What's going on? What is the end game? What are we going to do? Is this going to bring the Iranians back to the negotiating table? Highly unlikely. They've already withdrawn. They've already said we're going to continue with our nuclear capabilities, especially after the recent attacks, killing General Soleimani. So what's the end game? Are we going to send hundreds of thousands of more troops over there? This isn't Afghanistan. This is not Iraq. This is a well-developed military, a well-trained military. Not saying that they would beat us because they wouldn't, but that doesn't mean that they're not going to stand up for themselves and do something in response because they have other threats in the area from other countries in the area who are not friendly with the Iranians. They don't want to look weak. Been stating this for months. There's strong men all over the place. And what do they want to do? They want to look strong. They want to look masculine. Well, let me tell you something. To all these tough guys out there, especially all the tough guys wearing these red hats, make America great again. You think this is fantastic? What Donald Trump did last week? You think this is the best thing ever? You think this is the best foreign policy maneuver ever in the history of the globe, or at least in recent history? You better sign up to be the first to go over there. That's all I got to tell you. Nobody should want war. Nobody should want this. You better understand your history. We are in their backyard. They don't want us there. we wouldn't want them in our backyard either. You better provide some perspective here because a lot of people are going to end up dead. Maybe you're okay with that. I'm not. Stay diversified, stay vigilant, and stay with the Capital News. I am Alex Koritis. Godspeed.